What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the Migardener channel. It's an absolutely beautiful day today, so we're going to be planting beans today. It's been long overdue, but we've had a lot of rain. We really have not been able to get out in the garden. In fact, it kind of just dried out today, and beans are one of those plants you just can't grow if it's, well, you can't start them if it's really wet. One of the biggest questions we get asked all the time is, Luke, is there anything that I'm doing wrong? My beans and my corn are just not germinating well at all. And beans and corn are two things you can't plant if it's cool and damp. And for the past week, it's been cool and it's been damp, very damp. We've had about four days of rain out of the past 6 days. So it's quite a lot of rain. About 80% or so of the days have been just rain. And then it's also been really cool. I think almost every day, 6 out of the past 6 days have been below 60 degrees. So that's actually pretty chilly for Michigan at this time of year. And so cool weather, damp weather, it's a recipe for mildews and molds, which are two things that plague beans and corn. The weather's warmed up now, so the conditions are perfect to plant beans, and so that's what we're going to do today. The one thing that I was going to do before I plant is I've got a bunch of stuff sprouting up here in my bed where I top dressed with fresh compost. And so since we compost a lot of kitchen scraps and stuff like that from the garden, we've had a lot of seedlings that have germinated here. We've got a ton of tomatoes and peppers, which I don't need anymore. I really don't need any more of those. So we're gonna pluck those out and just throw those back in the compost pile. But I will be saving a lot of the volunteer cucumber and melon plants that sprouted because I could use some more over in our cucumber and melon bed. So that's what we're gonna do, is we're just gonna go through and pull those up first before we plant our beans, because I could really use those over there for additional plants. The next thing that I'm going to do before I plant is, it was brought up in a comment section that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the comment when it was brought up, and that was, rather than plant one plant of each variety, which we had planned on doing, we're actually going to follow this person's advice. I can't remember who it was that mentioned this, but they said, rather than doing one plant of each variety, why not do one row of each variety? And I thought that's actually a really good idea. Because, for instance, I mean, if we're growing the midnight black turtle bean, this is a drying bean. So you have to wait for the plant to produce all of its beans and then dry them so that you can use them for, like bulk storage inside during the off season, during the winter months. And so one plant really won't produce all that many beans. I mean, we might have enough beans to have a meal or two from one plant. But if you've got a row and you've got 10, 15 plants in a row, well, then you've got yourself 15, 20 meals out of that harvest. So, it's just about being a little more sensible about things. We're still going to have all of our diversity. This is the year of diversity, so we want to see all these varieties growing in our garden. It's just about being smart about things, and it's really impractical just to grow one plant of drying beans because you're just not going to get enough of them. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to grow one row per variety. So thank you, whoever that was. I really appreciate that. Here you go. This is exactly why we have a bunch of volunteers. This right here is the remnants of an old tomato. We have another one here, just the skins of the tomato. For whatever reason, tomato skins become almost look like plastic, but they're not. Those are tomato skins. And when they're like the last thing to deteriorate. But when they drop all their seeds, you end up with a lot of volunteers that sprout up. And while we love them, and while most people would say you're crazy to throw those out, we have thousands in this bed. We have just thousands. So you can see over here, we got, there's more right there. We have so many that over the course of this bed, we probably have 300, 400 tomato seedlings. And you can only use so many of them. All right, so I just got everything pulled up. The bed's prepped and ready to go, ready to plant some beans. But in the process of pulling everything up, it actually reminded me of a quick little tip that I wanted to share with you guys. So we get asked all the time, and it's not really a question, it's more or less concern over what actually was planted, what's a volunteer, what's a weed seed. A lot of beginning gardeners, they'll plant out their garden right after amending their bed with some fresh compost or right after tilling, and then they're met with a dilemma where everything germinates after the first couple rains, and you're not really sure what you planted. You're not really sure what should be there, what shouldn't be there, and this can really cause a lot of headache and hassle. So my best advice to all of you guys, and this is a really great tip that I don't know why I haven't brought it up, but it's something we do a lot. And that's if we know we're gonna be direct sowing stuff from seed, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be radishes, spinach, lettuce, beans. It really doesn't matter, even beets. If we're direct sowing something in the ground, what we wanna do is we wanna prep the bed about a week or two before we know we're actually going to have to plant. You don't wanna do this the day of, because the reason why is because that compost has a ton of seeds in it, a ton of weed seeds, volunteer plants, things like that, that you might want, but most of the time you don't want or you don't need necessarily. And if you plant directly in the ground that same day, those are all still going to be in there. And after the first couple rains or after you water, those are all going to germinate. And you don't want that because it just creates a ton of headache and a lot of hassle that's unnecessary. So we prep our bed about a week or two before we know we need to plant. We let rains come or whatever, or if it looks like it's gonna be really dry, we'll water the bed a couple times, and that allows all the weed seeds and all those volunteer seeds to germinate. And then once they're up, we can go through, weed them, and it really cuts down on their numbers. And that way we know where we're planting stuff, we know where we want it, we know we want it, and we know we're not going to be disrupting much by weeding up things that we don't need. So that way we can just go back and plant, and it makes our life a whole lot easier. All right, we're just gonna go through here and plant our bean seeds. The real nice thing about having soft soil is pretty much you just draw your rough rows where you want stuff, and then you can just push them in with your finger. So we're gonna plant the midnight black turtle bean. That's a nice bush bean there. And people always ask me, this is a question we get all the time, you guys, all the time. So I think it's worth mentioning. When people are planting out their beans or their corn or really anything for that matter that you're direct seeding, it could be radishes, it could be spinach, it could be carrots, anything that you're direct seeding. I cannot tell you guys enough, plant more than you actually need. A lot of times they'll plant exactly what they need with the exact spacing. And that's just unrealistic to think that everything is going to germinate. It's actually far better to go through, plant 2 seeds per hole, 3 seeds per hole even, or if you're putting them in a line, you're putting them in a row, plant rather than every 8 inches apart, plant them every 2 or 3 inches apart. Because then what's going to happen is if you get great germination rates and your stuff grows amazing, awesome. You go back and thin. But if your stuff doesn't germinate well, or if you run into some issues, then you have really spotty germination, and then it's really hard to go back and put something in that place. It's really hard to go back and put a seed there after everything's already growing up. Because as we've talked about before, those inconsistencies, it's really difficult to come back from. If you're planting everything out all at once, it's near impossible for the sunlight to touch those younger plants after you've already got some fully mature plants growing. It's just, they'll outcompete the younger plants. So go back or go by here and densely plant them. If you got the seeds, you might as well use them while they're fresh. Get them in the ground, and then as you need to thin, then you can thin. It's just a big mistake I see people making, and if I can prevent you guys from making a mistake, I always will. So I'm just putting 2 seeds per hole here, and I'm spacing them out every about 4 inches or so. And I'll go back and I'll thin those plants. So I have about 1 plant every about 6 to 8 inches. Another quick little planting tip for planting beans is I like to take both the beans in my thumb and my pointer finger. And what I like to do is I like to just push them in the ground, almost like a bird beak, and then just let go. And that way they're both planted together, and it also shows me where I put the seeds so that I can determine how far away I need to plant the next ones. It just helps save time, and I can really plant super efficiently that way. Just grab 2, push your fingers in, and let go. And that way they're going to be down about 1 inch where they need to be, 1/2 inch or so deep, and then you got them right next to each other, so the spacing is going to be accurate. And it's as easy as that. All right, so I've just been planting up all the snap beans now, and we ran into a tiny little bit of a road bump when it came to space. Now you probably saw this going into it, and for me, ignorance is bliss. I'm just having a ton of fun, and then when I see a problem, I'm like, oh, that's a problem. But from an outsider's perspective, you probably saw it coming, and that's just that there's just not enough space for all of them. If I designated a row per variety, we have 27 varieties of beans. That's about 2.5 beds worth of beans. And realistically, I know that, you know that, there's just not enough people to consume that many beans. Some would go to waste, and I hate the idea of growing something just to let it go to waste. So that's not what we're about here. And so we're actually kind of dialing things back when it comes to the snap beans. What we're doing instead to save space is we're simply doing a half a row and then a half a row of the other, kind of meeting in the middle. And that way we can still get all the variety we wanted to plant, and we're only using up one bed. Now, obviously the pole beans are a different story. Those are gonna go somewhere else because we can't trellis them up here. It would block all the sun. It would just be a big mess, and logistically, we can't put pole beans here. So pole beans are gonna go somewhere else. But when it comes to the bush beans and the snap beans, things like that, it's fine. Now, the dry shelling beans, those got their own row because, like I said, we need enough plants to justify planting them. If you're only growing one plant, it's not like snap beans where the more you harvest, the more you get. With the dry shelling beans, what the plant produces is what you get. And so we needed a fair amount of plants to make some sustenance and actually justify planting them. So those are fine with their full row. Plus I can't go back and dig out the seeds anyways. That'd be a nightmare. So those got their own row. And then all the snap beans, they're going to get a half a row, which is fine. We're gonna have so many beans by the end of the day. We still probably will be giving some away to friends and family and our local soup kitchen. There's so much here, and these beds will produce so many beans that we'll be fine. I think we'll be plenty fine. All right, and the very last thing we have to do is just come back here and tamp down the soil. When you're direct sowing seed, this is actually a really important step that I see a lot of people not doing, and it's just something we do to really create good contact with the seeds. You don't want air gaps, you don't want voids, because the seeds don't germinate well in air. They need good contact with the soil. So all we're doing is just coming back here and just tamping down the soil really gently with the rake, and that makes really good contact. So that's about it. We got everything planted up, everything's ready to grow. The last thing I was gonna mention is we're not going to water. It seems really counterintuitive, but because the soil is so damp already with all the rain we've had, the last thing I wanna do is promote rot and rotten mold. So what we're going to do is just leave them in this damp soil here, let them start germinating, and if it doesn't rain within 2 or 3 days, then we'll follow back up and we'll give them some water. But as of right now, they're good. And we should start to see sprouts in about 5 to 7 days. So I cannot wait. It's gonna be a lot of fun. And I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. And as always, this is Luke from the Migardener channel reminding you to grow big or go home. We'll catch you all later. See ya.